I was fishing at night at the dock when a car suddenly plunged into the water right in front of me. I was stunned to recognize my son's license plate. I screamed for help and suddenly saw him standing on the shore. He wasn't frightened at all, just coldly smirked at me before turning his back and disappearing into the darkness. When the rescue team pulled the car out, I was speechless when I saw what was inside the trunk. Hi everyone, thank you for being here. Please like, subscribe, and comment where you're from. This is a fictional story created for storytelling purposes. All characters and events are invented, but the message is meaningful. If you want to discover what was hidden in the trunk, stay tuned. Let's begin. I never imagined that a quiet October evening by the river would become the night that shattered everything I believed about my son. The wooden planks of my private dock creaked softly beneath my feet as I cast my line into the dark waters of the Hudson. It was just past 9 o'clock, and the autumn air carried that peculiar chill that seeps into your bones and reminds you that winter isn't far behind. Above me, a half-moon struggled to break through the clouds, casting pale, ghostly light across the water's surface. In the distance, the faint glow of street lamps lined the empty road that wound along the riverbank. This was my ritual now. Every evening, weather permitting, I'd come out here with my fishing rod, a thermos of coffee, and the crushing weight of loneliness that had become my constant companion for the past 3 years. My name is Robert Mitchell. I'm 68 years old, and I've been a widower since August of 2020. That's when I lost Catherine, my wife of 35 years, my best friend, the woman who made every day worth living. The doctors said it was a car accident. Rain-slicked roads, poor visibility, her vehicle sliding into a utility pole on her way home from the grocery store. Gone in an instant. No warning, no goodbye. I still remember the police officer standing on my porch, hat in hand, the words coming out of his mouth, but not quite reaching my brain. I'm so sorry, Mr. Mitchell. There was nothing anyone could have done. 3 years later, and I still catch myself setting 2 coffee mugs on the counter in the morning. Still reach for her hand in bed before remembering the sheets on her side are cold. The house, this big, rambling place where we raised our son, where we celebrated birthdays and anniversaries and ordinary Tuesday evenings, feels too large now. Too quiet. Too full of ghosts. Fishing helps. Not because I care about catching anything, I usually throw them back anyway, but because it gives me somewhere to be. Something to do with my hands. A reason to step outside the oppressive silence of that empty house. I can still see Catherine in every corner of it. The kitchen, where she'd dance while making dinner, singing off-key to old Motown songs on the radio. The living room, where we'd curl up on the couch. Her feet tucked under my leg while we watched movies we'd both seen a dozen times. The garden she tended with such care, where roses still bloom each summer, even though she's no longer here to see them. We were happy. God, we were so happy. And then she was gone. The line tugged gently, pulling me back to the present. I reeled it in slowly, more out of habit than genuine interest. A small base, nothing special. I carefully removed the hook and lowered it back into the water, watching it disappear into the darkness. Swim safe, I murmured, a small ritual I'd developed. Catherine used to laugh at me for talking to the fish. They can't hear you, you know, she'd say, her eyes twinkling with amusement. But I did it anyway. Still do. My thoughts drifted, as they often did, to Daniel. My son. 38 years old. Chief Executive Officer of Mitchell Financial Group, the company I'd built from nothing over 3 decades, and handed over to him 5 years ago when I decided to step back. By all accounts, he was doing well. The business was profitable. Our clients were satisfied. Daniel had the corner office, the expensive suits, the luxury car, the penthouse apartment in Manhattan. From the outside, he looked like everything a father could hope for. Successful, independent, living the American dream. But we barely spoke anymore. It hadn't always been this way. When he was young, Daniel and I were close. Weekend fishing trips, backyard baseball, late-night conversations about his dreams and fears. I taught him to drive, helped him with college applications, walked him through his first heartbreak. He was my boy, my pride and joy. Then somewhere along the way, things changed. Maybe it started when he went away to college, or when he got his first serious job and got a taste of power. Or maybe it was after Catherine passed, and he threw himself into work, distancing himself from the grief that consumed me. Now we exchanged the occasional text message, brief phone calls on birthdays and holidays, conversations that felt rehearsed and hollow. "How are you, Dad?" "Fine, son. You talked to him busy. Work's crazy. I understand." Click. I tried not to take it personally. Daniel had his own life, his own responsibilities. He was building his empire, and I was just the old man fishing alone on a dock living in the past. But I missed him. Missed the boy he used to be. Missed feeling like I mattered to him. The October wind picked up rustling through the trees behind me and sending ripples across the water. I pulled my jacket tighter and checked my watch. 9:15. I'd give it another 20 minutes, then head inside to heat up some leftover soup and pretend to care about whatever was on television. That's when I heard it. An engine, a car engine specifically. The sound was coming from the road behind me, maybe 100 yards away through the trees. That wasn't particularly unusual during the day. The road connected to the main highway about a mile down, but at this hour, on a Wednesday night in October, the road past my property was barely more than a dirt path used mainly by locals as a shortcut. Nobody drove it at night. There were no streetlights, no shoulder, just narrow lanes winding between dense woods on one side and the river on the other. But this engine was loud. Too loud. Racing, not cruising. The roar of it grew closer, accompanied by the screech of tires on gravel. I turned toward the sound, squinting into the darkness beyond the tree line. My fishing rod hung forgotten in my hand. Something was wrong. The sound was all wrong, desperate, frantic, like someone pushing a vehicle beyond its limits. No one drove like that unless they were running from something, or running toward something terrible. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach as the engine noise grew louder, closer, more urgent. I stood frozen on that dock, my heart beginning to pound, every instinct screaming that whatever was about to happen would change everything. I looked up toward the road, and a sense of foreboding washed over me like the cold October wind cutting across the water. The engine noise grew louder. I looked up and felt my blood freeze. A black sedan came barreling down the dirt road, headlights off, moving through the darkness like a predator stalking prey. No brake lights, no hesitation. Just raw speed and the grinding roar of an engine pushed to its limit. Gravel sprayed into the air, glinting faintly in the moonlight as the tires tore across the uneven ground. I dropped my fishing rod. It clattered onto the dock, but I barely heard it. My eyes were locked on the car as it hurtled toward the riverbank. It was a black Mercedes S-Class. Even in the dark, I recognized the sleek lines, the polished body, the chrome trim that caught the faint glow of the distant streetlights. And then I saw the license plate. 7XPJ-492. My breath caught in my throat. That was Daniel's car. No. The word came out as a whisper swallowed by the wind. The Mercedes smashed through the low wooden guardrail splinters, exploding into the night. For one surreal moment, the car hung in mid-air, doors already swinging open, and then gravity took over. It plunged nose first into the Hudson River with a deafening crash. Water erupted skyward, a massive plume that glittered silver in the moonlight before crashing back down. But the engine was still running. I could hear it, a muffled, guttural roar beneath the surface, the sound of machinery fighting against water and gravity. And the doors. Both front doors were wide open, flapping in the current like broken wings. But there was no one inside. "What?" My voice cracked. An accident. But where? My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. The car had been moving fast, deliberate, like someone had aimed it at the water. But if it was an accident, why were the doors already open? Why were the headlights off? And where the hell was Daniel? I didn't think. I ran. My legs carried me down the dock, toward the small aluminum fishing boat I kept tied at the end. My hands shook as I fumbled with the rope, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. Behind me, the Mercedes was sinking, the engine sputtering as water poured into the cabin. I finally got the rope free and threw myself into the boat, nearly tipping it over. The oars rattled in their locks as I grabbed them and started rowing, pulling hard against the sluggish current. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears like a drum. The car was maybe 100 yards out, its red taillights still glowing beneath the surface, casting an eerie glow through the dark water. Bubbles streamed upward in violent bursts, and the open doors swayed gently, almost peacefully, as the car tilted further and began its slow descent into the depths. I rowed harder, my arms burning my lungs, screaming for air. The cold October wind cut across the water, biting at my face, but I didn't care. All I could think about was that car, Daniel's car, sinking into the river. And then I saw him. A figure stood on the shore about 50 feet from where the guardrail had been smashed apart. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there watching the car sink. Watching. My oars stilled. The boat drifted forward on its momentum, and for one long, impossible moment, I couldn't breathe. It was Daniel. Even from this distance, I recognized the shape of him, the way he stood, shoulders hunched slightly forward, hands shoved into his pockets. The moonlight caught the side of his face, and I saw his expression, pale, wide-eyed, frozen. He looked terrified and guilty. "Daniel!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Daniel." His head snapped toward me. Our eyes met across the dark water, father and son, and for one unbearable heartbeat, the world stopped. I saw the shock in his face, the way his mouth opened slightly, as if he wanted to say something, wanted to explain, but he didn't. Instead, he turned and ran. "Daniel, wait!" I screamed, standing up in the boat. It rocked violently beneath me, and I nearly fell, but I didn't care. "Daniel, stop!" He didn't stop. He sprinted toward the road, his footsteps crunching on the gravel, and I saw it then, a dark sedan parked just beyond the tree's engine, idling, headlights off. He threw himself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and the car roared to life. The tires screeched as he peeled away, kicking up a cloud of dust and gravel. The sedan's taillights flared red for just an instant, before disappearing around the bend, swallowed by the darkness. And then he was gone. I stood there in the boat, oars loose in my hands, staring at the empty road. Behind me, the Mercedes finally gave up its fight. The engine sputtered one last time and died, and the car slipped beneath the surface with a soft, gurgling hiss. The taillights flickered once, twice, and then went dark. The river was silent. I sank back onto the wooden seat, my legs trembling. My phone was still in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out with shaking hands and stared at the screen for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the numbers. Then I dialed. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, professional, impossibly distant. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My throat felt tight, my chest hollow. "Sir, are you there? What's your emergency?" I swallowed hard, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need to report." I paused, my breath hitching. "A car that was just pushed into the river." "Can you confirm your location, sir?" "Private dock, half a mile south of Riverside Marina, Hudson River." "Are there any injuries? Is anyone in the water?" I closed my eyes. The image of Daniel standing on the shore, watching, waiting, burned behind my eyelids. "No." I said quietly. No one's in the water. Can you describe what happened? I felt the weight of the words pressing down on me, heavy and suffocating, but I forced them out. And I know who did it. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Sir, I called 911, my voice shaking. I need to report a car that was just pushed into the river, and I know who did it. It was my son. Police and rescue arrived 30 minutes later. I was still standing there, soaking wet and shaking from cold and shock. The flashing red and blue lights painted the riverbank in violent bursts of color, turning the dark water into a kaleidoscope of crimson and sapphire. Voices shouted back and forth, urgent, clipped, professional. A fire truck rumbled to a stop near the broken guardrail, and a rescue boat was already being lowered into the Hudson, its engine sputtering to life. But I barely registered any of it. I stood on the shore, my clothes dripping, my arms wrapped around myself, as if I could hold the pieces of me together. My teeth chattered. My legs felt like they might give out at any moment. The cold had seeped so deep into my bones that I wasn't sure I'd ever feel warm again. A woman approached me, her footsteps crunching on the gravel. She was in her early 40s, Asian with sharp, intelligent eyes and short black hair pulled back into a practical ponytail. She wore a dark blazer over a white blouse, a badge clipped to her belt. Her expression was calm, measured, but I could see the intensity behind it, the way she was already piecing things together, reading the scene like a book. Mr. Mitchell, she said, her voice firm but not unkind. I'm Detective Sarah Mitchell. You're the one who called this in. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Can you tell me what happened? I opened my mouth, but the words stuck. How could I explain what I'd seen? How could I put into words the image of my son standing on that shore, watching his own car sink into the river, then running away like a fugitive? My voice came out as a rasp. I saw the car go in, the Mercedes. I gestured weakly toward the water. Detective Mitchell's gaze followed my hand, then returned to my face. She studied me for a long moment, and I had the unsettling feeling that she could see straight through me. We'll get it out, she said. The dive team's already in the water. Just sit tight. I wanted to sit. I wanted to collapse onto the cold ground and close my eyes and pretend none of this was happening. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, staring at the dark water where Daniel's car had disappeared. It took another hour. The dive team worked under massive floodlights that turned the night into a harsh, artificial day. I watched as they attached cables to the submerged Mercedes, their movements precise and efficient. A heavy-duty tow truck groaned to life, its winch whining as it began to pull. Slowly, agonizingly, the car emerged. Water poured from the open doors and shattered windows, cascading back into the river in thick sheets. The black paint gleamed under the floodlights, slick and distorted. The front end was crumpled from the impact, the hood buckled, the chrome grille twisted into a grotesque smile. But it was still Daniel's car. I'd know it anywhere. The tow truck dragged it onto the shore with a metallic screech, and the rescue team swarmed around it, checking the interior, the trunk, every inch of the wreckage. I stood a few feet away, my hands shoved deep into my pockets, my breath coming in shallow bursts. And then I heard it. Detective, we've got something. One of the officers was crouched near the open trunk, shining a flashlight into the interior. Detective Mitchell hurried over, and I followed, my legs moving on autopilot. There, nestled among the wet carpet and scattered debris, was a small black safe. It was about the size of a briefcase made of heavy steel with a combination lock on the front. Water dripped from its edges, pooling on the ground beneath it. The officer tried the handle, but it didn't budge. "Lock tight," he said. Detective Mitchell glanced at me. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a question in her eyes. "Mr. Mitchell," she said slowly. Do you know who this car belongs to? The question hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I felt every pair of eyes on the shore turn toward me, officers, rescue workers, firefighters, waiting. I could lie. I could say I didn't know. I could protect Daniel, give him time to run, to disappear, to escape whatever consequences were waiting for him. But what would that make me? I thought of Catherine. I thought of the life we'd built together, the values we'd tried to instill in our son. Honesty, integrity, doing the right thing even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. I swallowed hard, my voice barely above a whisper. It's my son's car. The words felt like stones in my mouth. Detective Mitchell's eyes sharpened. Your son, Daniel Mitchell, he's 38. He's the CEO of... I stopped, my breath hitching. I saw him. Tonight. He was standing right there watching the car go in. And then he drove away. A ripple of murmurs spread through the officers. Detective Mitchell held up a hand, silencing them. She stepped closer to me, her voice low. Mr. Mitchell, are you telling me your son deliberately put this car in the river? I couldn't meet her eyes. I stared at the ground, at the mud and gravel beneath my feet, and nodded. Jesus, someone muttered. Detective Mitchell turned back to the safe, her jaw tight. Get a locksmith out here. Now. It took another 40 minutes for the locksmith to arrive, a wiry man in his 50s, with calloused hands and a tool bag slung over his shoulder. He knelt beside the safe, studying the lock with the kind of focus I'd only ever seen in surgeons. The officers stood in a loose circle around him, watching in tense silence. I stood at the edge of the circle. My arms crossed my heart, pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I didn't know what was in that safe. I didn't know what Daniel had been hiding, what he'd been so desperate to destroy that he'd sunk his own car into the Hudson River. But I needed to know. The locksmith worked for what felt like an eternity, his tools clicking and scraping against the metal. And then with a soft click, the lock gave way. He stepped back, nodding to Detective Mitchell. She pulled on a pair of latex gloves and crouched beside the safe. Her fingers gripped the handle, and she slowly lifted the lid. A flashlight beam cut into the interior, illuminating whatever lay inside. I couldn't see from where I stood, but I saw Detective Mitchell's face. The color drained from her cheeks. Her eyes widened. Her mouth pressed into a thin, hard line. She looked up at me, and for the first time since she'd arrived, I saw something in her expression that made my blood run cold. Fear. Mr. Mitchell, she said, her voice tight and controlled. You need to sit down right now. I looked inside the safe, and what I saw made me feel completely dizzy. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The world around me, the flashing lights, the murmur of voices, the cold night air, all of it faded into static. All I could see was what lay inside that small black safe, illuminated by the harsh beam of Detective Mitchell's flashlight. 3 black USB drives lined up neatly in a row. Each one was labeled with a strip of white tape and a handwritten date. October 2021, March 2022, July 2023. A leather-bound notebook, the pages warped and stained from the river water, but still intact. I could see rows of numbers written in tight, precise handwriting figures, dates, names, all crammed together in a code I didn't understand. And cash, stacks of it, $50,000 in $100 bills bound tight with rubber bands. The bills were damp, clinging to each other, but unmistakable. But it was the documents beneath the money that made my stomach drop. A stack of contracts, maybe 10 or 12 pages thick, printed on heavy paper. The edges were wet and curling, but the text was still legible. And at the bottom of each page in bold black ink was a signature. Robert Mitchell. My name. My signature. Except it wasn't. I stared at the contracts, my hands trembling. I leaned closer, ignoring Detective Mitchell's sharp glance, and traced the signature with my eyes. The loops of the R, the slant of the M, the flourish at the end of Mitchell. It was all there. It looked like my signature. It almost was my signature. But it wasn't. "That's not mine," I said, my voice hoarse. Detective Mitchell's head snapped toward me. "Excuse me, that's signature." I pointed at the contracts, my hand shaking. "It's not mine. It looks like it, but it's not. I didn't sign those." She studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she pulled one of the contracts from the safe, holding it up to the light. Her eyes flicked between the signature and my face. "Mr. Mitchell," she said slowly, "this looks exactly like your signature." "I know, but it's not." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I've signed thousands of documents over 35 years. Contracts, leases, loan agreements, board resolutions. I know my own signature, and that, I gestured at the paper. That's close, but it's not mine. Detective Mitchell's jaw tightened. I could see the doubt in her eyes. She thought I was lying. She thought I was trying to cover my tracks, protect myself from whatever crimes were buried in those contracts. But I wasn't. "Look," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "The pressure's different. The angle of the M is too steep. And the tail on the L, I always loop it back. Always. Whoever signed this didn't." She didn't respond. She just stared at the contract, her brow furrowed. And then she reached back into the safe and pulled out something else. A sealed envelope, white unmarked except for a single line of text written in black marker across the front. "Catherine." Proof. My breath caught. Catherine. My wife's name. My hands went numb. I felt the ground tilt beneath me, and I had to grab the side of the tow truck to steady myself. "What?" My voice cracked. "What is that?" Detective Mitchell didn't answer. She turned the envelope over in her hands, studying it, then glanced at me. Her expression had shifted, no longer skeptical, but cautious. Wary. "We need to take all of this in," she said, "including you, Mr. Mitchell. I need you to come to the station and give a formal statement." I barely heard her. My eyes were locked on that envelope, on Catherine's name written in Daniel's handwriting. I'd know his handwriting anywhere. The sharp angles, the hurried slant, the way he always pressed too hard with the pen. What did Daniel have in that envelope? What proof was he talking about? And why Catherine's name? The police station was a 20-minute drive from the river, but it felt like hours. I sat in the back of Detective Mitchell's sedan, staring out the window at the dark streets sliding past. My clothes were still damp, clinging to my skin. I couldn't stop shaking. The safe and its contents had been bagged and loaded into an evidence van. Detective Mitchell had made a call on the way to the station, short-clipped, using phrases like financial fraud, falsified documents, and federal jurisdiction. By the time we arrived, the FBI was already there. Agent Marcus Cole was waiting in the lobby. He was in his mid-40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with close-cropped graying hair and sharp, calculating eyes. He wore a dark suit and a burgundy tie, and he moved with the kind of precision that came from years of field work. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm, controlled. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, his voice deep and even. "I'm Special Agent Marcus Cole with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. I understand this has been a difficult night for you." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He gestured toward a hallway. "Let's talk." They put me in an interview room, small, windowless, with a metal table and 2 chairs bolted to the floor. A camera blinked silently in the corner. Detective Mitchell sat across from me, a notepad open in front of her. Agent Cole stood by the door, arms crossed, watching me with those sharp eyes. They asked me questions. Lots of questions. When had I last seen Daniel? What kind of relationship did we have? Did I know anything about his business dealings? Had I ever signed financial documents without reading them? Did I know anyone named Eddie Torres? I answered as best I could, but my mind kept drifting back to that envelope. Catherine. Proof. Finally, Agent Cole leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. He'd been silent for most of the interview, letting Detective Mitchell take the lead. But now his gaze locked onto mine, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Mr. Mitchell," he said quietly, "we need to analyze those USB drives. We need to examine the contracts, the notebook, everything in that safe. But I have to be honest with you." He paused, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not pity exactly, but something close. "What we find may be very painful," he said. "It may change everything you thought you knew about your son, about your family, about your wife." My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. He leaned back, his expression grave. "Are you sure you want to know?" 2 days later, the FBI summoned me. I hadn't been able to sleep since that fateful night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel standing on the riverbank, watching his car sink into the Hudson. I saw the way he'd looked at me, pale, terrified, guilty, before he turned and ran. I heard the splash of the Mercedes hitting the water, the muffled roar of the engine fighting against the river, and I saw that envelope, Catherine's name written in Daniel's handwriting, taunting me with secrets I didn't understand. I spent those 2 days in a fog. I didn't eat. I barely left the house. The phone rang constantly. Reporters, colleagues, people I hadn't spoken to in years, but I ignored them all. I sat in the living room, staring at the wall, waiting for answers that felt like they might destroy me. On Friday afternoon, at exactly 2 o'clock, I walked into the FBI's Manhattan field office. Agent Marcus Cole was waiting for me in a conference room on the 7th floor. The room was sterile and cold, with white walls, fluorescent lights, and a long table covered in folders, printouts, and evidence bags. Detective Mitchell was there too, standing by the window with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Agent Cole gestured to a chair. "Mr. Mitchell, thank you for coming." I sat down, my hands folded tightly in my lap. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "We've analyzed the contents of the safe," Agent Cole said, his voice calm and measured. He opened one of the folders and slid it across the table toward me. "What we found is extensive." I stared at the folder. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to see what was inside, but I had no choice. Agent Cole didn't wait for me to move. He began laying out documents one by one, like a dealer spreading cards across a table. 3 USB drives, he said. Each one contains financial records spanning the last 4 years. Bank statements, wire transfer logs, offshore account ledgers. We've cross-referenced everything with your company's official filings. He paused, meeting my eyes. "Mr. Mitchell, someone has been systematically embezzling money from Mitchell Financial Group's client trust funds. Over the past 4 years, $47 million has been siphoned off and moved through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. 47 million, I whispered. "That's correct." Agent Cole pulled out another document, a printout of a wire transfer. In addition, we found evidence of bribery. $2.3 million paid to various government officials over the past 3 years. Regulators, tax auditors, compliance officers, all of it designed to hide the embezzlement and keep your company's books clean. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the table, trying to steady myself. "And there's more," Agent Cole continued. Tax fraud. $8 million in unreported income routed through dummy corporations and fake consulting contracts. The IRS is going to have a field day with this. I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. The numbers were too big, too impossible. 47 million. 2.3 million. 8 million. Chatri. But here's the thing, Mr. Mitchell. Agent Cole leaned forward, his gaze sharp. Every single transaction, every wire transfer, every contract, every payment was authorized with your signature. He slid a stack of contracts toward me. I recognized them immediately. They were the same ones we'd found in the safe, the ones with my name signed at the bottom. Our forensic document examiners analyzed these signatures, Agent Cole said. They compared them to samples of your verified signature from tax returns, legal filings, and board resolutions. The forged signatures match your real signature at a 94% accuracy rate. 94%. I stared at the contracts, my vision blurring. The signatures looked so real, so convincing. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed I'd signed them myself. Whoever did this, Agent Cole said quietly, is very, very good. They studied your handwriting. They replicated the pressure, the slant, the loops. They made it look like you. But it wasn't me, I said, my voice barely audible. I know. Agent Cole's tone softened just slightly. We know. The examiners flagged several inconsistencies, small details that only a trained eye would catch. The angle of certain letters, the spacing, the way the pen lifts at the end of a stroke. It's close, but it's not perfect. I felt a flicker of relief, but it was drowned out by a wave of rage. Daniel. The name came out as a growl. No, he did this. He forged my signature. He stole from the company, bribed officials, committed fraud, and he tried to pin it all on me. Agent Cole nodded slowly. That's our working theory, yes. But why? My voice cracked. Why would he do this? Money, power, control. Agent Cole gestured at the documents spread across the table. According to our records, you own 65% of Mitchell Financial Group's shares. Daniel owns 20%. The rest is divided among minority investors. If you were convicted of these crimes, you'd lose everything. Your shares, your position, your reputation. And Daniel would take it all. I finished, my stomach twisting. Agent Cole didn't disagree. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the evidence, at the proof of my son's betrayal. The boy I'd raised, the man I'd trusted, the only family I had left. He'd tried to destroy me. I'm going to fight this, I said, my voice hardening. I'm not going to let him win. Agent Cole studied me, then nodded. You'll need a good lawyer, someone who specializes in white-collar crime. I know someone. I thought of Jonathan Pierce, a lawyer I'd worked with years ago, sharp, relentless, with a reputation for taking on impossible cases and winning. I'll call him. Detective Mitchell spoke for the first time, her voice quiet. Mr. Mitchell, there's something else. I looked up at her. She glanced at Agent Cole, who reached into one of the evidence bags and pulled out the white envelope. The one marked, Catherine. Proof. My chest tightened. Agent Cole held it in his hands, his expression grave. He didn't open it. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Sympathy, maybe. Or pity. Mr. Mitchell, he said gently, are you sure you want to see this? I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. It's related to your wife's passing, he said softly. 3 years ago. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Catherine. My Catherine. Agent Cole held up the envelope marked Catherine. proof, and said gently, "Are you sure you want to see this? It's related to your wife's passing 3 years ago." I opened the envelope with trembling hands. What was inside exceeded my imagination. A small digital audio recorder, a manila folder with a private investigation firm's letterhead, and a stack of glossy photographs showing the underside of a car. Catherine's car, the one she'd been driving the night she passed away. Agent Cole picked up the recorder. "Mr. Mitchell, I need you to listen to something." He pressed play. For a few seconds there was only static. Then I heard her voice. "Catherine." "Daniel, I know what you've been doing." Her voice was tight controlled, but I could hear the anger beneath it, the fear. "Mom, I don't know what you're talking about." "That was Daniel." "Don't lie to me. I hired someone, a forensic accountant. He found everything. $5 million, Daniel. You stole $5 million from the company." Silence. Then Daniel's voice colder now. "You hired someone to investigate me. I had to. Your father trusted you. He gave you control of the day-to-day operations, and you—" Her voice cracked. "But how could you do this to him, to us?" "I didn't steal anything. I borrowed it. I was going to pay it back." "Borrowed, Daniel. You funneled it through shell companies. You falsified records. That's not borrowing. That's embezzlement." Another silence. When Daniel spoke again, his voice was flat, empty. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to the police tomorrow morning, and then I'm telling your father everything." "Mom." His tone shifted quieter, almost pleading. But there was something underneath it. Something dark. "You shouldn't do that." "I have to. You've committed a crime, Daniel. I can't protect you from this." "Mom, this conversation is over." The recording ended with a soft click. I stared at the recorder, my hands shaking. That conversation had taken place 1 week before Catherine's accident. 1 week before she passed away. Agent Cole opened the manila folder and slid the report toward me. It was a private investigator's report, dated 2 days before Catherine's passing. She'd hired Gerald Moss, a former NYPD detective, to look into Daniel's finances. The report was meticulous. Bank statements, wire transfers, offshore accounts, shell corporations in the Cayman Islands and Delaware. $5 million. Just like Catherine had said. At the bottom, a handwritten note in Catherine's neat script. "I have to tell Robert. I have to make this right." My vision blurred. Agent Cole slid the photographs toward me. "We had these analyzed by our forensic automotive team." The photos showed Catherine's Honda Accord. The brake lines were highlighted with red circles. They'd been cut, not frayed, not worn. Cut, clean, deliberate incisions. Someone had severed the brake lines just enough that they would hold for a short time, long enough to get the car moving, but would fail under pressure. Under braking, the room tilted. It had been a rainy night. Late summer, one of those storms that turned the roads into slick black mirrors. Catherine had been driving home from her book club. I'd told her to be careful. She'd laughed and kissed my cheek. "I've been driving in the rain for 40 years, Robert. I think I can handle it." Those were the last words she ever said to me. The police called at 11:47 p.m. Catherine's car had gone off Route 9 near the bend by the old mill. She'd crashed into a utility pole at high speed. The airbag had deployed, but the impact had been too severe. She was gone by the time the paramedics arrived. The police ruled it an accident. Wet roads, poor visibility, speed. I'd believed them. It made sense. It was tragic, but it made sense. I'd buried my wife. I'd mourned her. I'd spent 3 years blaming the rain, blaming the road, blaming fate. But it wasn't fate. It was Daniel. I looked up at Agent Cole, my voice barely a whisper. He took her from me. He cut the brakes. He caused the accident. My throat closed up. Not based on this evidence, Agent Cole said quietly. We're officially reopening the investigation into your wife's passing. We'll be bringing in automotive forensics experts reviewing the original crash report and interviewing witnesses. If Daniel Mitchell is responsible, we will prove it. I felt something inside me break. All the grief I'd been holding for 3 years, the loneliness, the guilt, the unanswered questions came pouring out. I buried my face in my hands and wept. I wept for Catherine, for the life we'd lost, for the son I thought I knew. Detective Mitchell placed a hand on my shoulder. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, a quiet presence. I don't know how long I sat there sobbing. Minutes, maybe. Hours. Time had no meaning. Eventually, the tears stopped. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, but I didn't stand up. Not yet. I sat there staring at the photographs of the cut brake lines at the audio recorder, at the report Catherine had commissioned just days before she lost her life. And then the question came, why would Daniel do this? Why would he take his own mother's life? Was it really just about $5 million? I'd seen men do terrible things for money. I'd spent 35 years in finance. I knew what greed could do. But this sabotaging his own mother's car, cutting the brake lines, knowing she'd crash, I couldn't finish the thought. $5 million. That was enough to ruin a career, enough for prison time. But was it enough to justify this? No. There had to be more. I thought about the forged signatures Agent Cole had shown me, the $47 million embezzled over 4 years. The elaborate conspiracy to frame me. Daniel hadn't just stolen $5 million. He'd stolen 47. And he'd tried to pin it all on me. If I went to prison, he'd take control of my 65% stake. That's what Agent Cole had said. If I was convicted, I'd lose everything. And Daniel would have it all. Was that it? Was that why he'd taken Catherine, not just to silence her, not just to cover up $5 million, but because she was the first obstacle in a much larger plan, a plan to destroy me, to frame me, to take everything I'd built? Daniel hadn't just been covering his tracks. He'd been laying a foundation. Catherine's passing wasn't the end of his scheme, it was the beginning, and I was next. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking but holding. Agent Cole and Detective Mitchell both turned to look at me. I looked at Agent Cole, and when I spoke, my voice was steady, hard. Find Daniel for me. I want to confront him face to face. 3 days later, on Monday morning, my phone was ringing non-stop. News about Daniel had flooded every newspaper. I woke to the sound of it buzzing on my nightstand, over and over, an endless loop of vibrations that dragged me out of a restless sleep. I grabbed it with a shaking hand and stared at the screen. 12 missed calls, 27 text messages, 17 voicemails, and then I saw the news alert at the top of the screen. CEO Daniel Mitchell turns himself in, accuses father of massive embezzlement scheme. My chest tightened. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and unlocked the phone. The alert opened to a news article, and the first line hit me like a punch to the gut. In a stunning development, Daniel Mitchell, 38, CEO of Mitchell Financial Group, voluntarily surrendered to authorities this morning and announced he would be holding a press conference at 2 p.m. Sources say Mitchell plans to expose his father company founder Robert Mitchell, 68, as the mastermind behind a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. I couldn't breathe. I scrolled down. More articles. Dozens of them. Every major news outlet had picked up the story. Social media was exploding with speculation. Comment sections were filled with outrage, disbelief, and condemnation, and all of it was aimed at me. By noon, I was sitting in my living room staring at the television screen. Every channel was covering the story. My phone had been ringing so much I'd finally turned it off. Reporters were camped outside my house. I could see them through the window vans with satellite dishes, cameras on tripods, journalists shouting questions I couldn't hear through the glass. At exactly 2 p.m., the press conference began. The screen showed a podium set up outside the Manhattan precinct, where Daniel had turned himself in. Behind the podium stood Daniel, flanked by a man in an expensive suit. His lawyer, according to the caption, Richard Lawson, defense attorney. Daniel looked calm, composed. He wore a navy suit and a somber expression, his hands folded in front of him. He looked like a man carrying the weight of a terrible burden. He looked like a victim. Richard Lawson stepped up to the microphone first. "Good afternoon. My client Daniel Mitchell has voluntarily cooperated with law enforcement and is here today to make a statement. Mr. Mitchell has struggled with this decision for a long time, but he believes it is his moral duty to come forward and tell the truth, no matter how painful that truth may be." Lawson stepped aside and Daniel took his place at the microphone. "Thank you all for being here." Daniel said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "This is the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but I can't stay silent anymore." He paused, lowering his eyes as if gathering his courage. When he looked up again, his expression was pained. "For the past several years, my father, Robert Mitchell, has been systematically embezzling money from Mitchell Financial Group. Tens of millions of dollars have been stolen from client trust funds, funneled through offshore accounts, and hidden behind falsified documents. I discovered the scheme 2 years ago, and I've been struggling ever since with what to do." My stomach dropped. I felt the walls closing in around me. I wanted to protect my family. Daniel continued, his voice cracking slightly. "My father built this company. He built our name. I didn't want to believe he was capable of something like this, so I gathered evidence. I documented everything. I put it in a safe, hoping, praying that I was wrong, that there was some explanation." He shook his head, his jaw tightening. But there wasn't. And when my father realized, I knew he tried to frame me. He forged documents to make it look like I was the one stealing. He abandoned his car in the Hudson River to destroy evidence. And when that didn't work, he tried to turn law enforcement against me. He looked directly into the camera, his eyes filled with what looked like genuine anguish. "I love my father, but I can't protect him anymore. Not when innocent people have lost their savings, not when families have been destroyed. I have to do what's right, even if it costs me everything." The press erupted into questions, but Daniel stepped back from the podium, and Richard Lawson took over fielding inquiries with practiced ease. I sat there frozen, staring at the screen. He'd done it. Daniel had flipped the entire narrative. He'd painted himself as the hero, the brave son who'd risked everything to expose his corrupt father. And the world was buying it. Within an hour, the stock price of Mitchell Financial Group had plummeted 40%. Trading was halted twice due to volatility. Clients were calling in droves, demanding answers, threatening lawsuits. Employees were panicking. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting. By 5 p.m., I received an email from the board's chairman, Mr. Mitchell. "In light of recent developments, the board has voted to suspend your authority as chairman and largest shareholder, pending a full investigation. You are not to enter company premises or access company accounts until further notice. Legal counsel will be in touch." I stared at the email, my hands trembling. Everything I'd built over 35 years gone. My reputation, my company, my legacy destroyed in a single afternoon by my own son. My phone, which I'd turned back on to check the email, buzzed with another incoming call. I almost ignored it. I couldn't take another reporter, another lawyer, another person demanding answers I didn't have. But then I saw the name on the screen. Thomas Parker. Thomas had been my right-hand man for over a decade before I'd asked him to step down and mentor Daniel. He was the COO, the person I'd trusted to help my son transition into leadership. If anyone knew Daniel's operations inside and out, it was Thomas. I answered, "Mr. Mitchell." His voice was low, urgent. "I've been trying to reach you all day. I saw the press conference." Thomas. My voice broke. I know," he said quickly. "I know you didn't do this, and I can prove it." I froze. "What?" "I need to see you tonight. In person. I have evidence about Daniel, real evidence, but we can't talk about this over the phone." My heart was pounding. "What kind of evidence?" "The kind that will prove Daniel's been lying about everything." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. In the middle of the chaos, a familiar voice called, "Mr. Mitchell, this is Thomas Parker. I need to see you tonight. I have evidence about Daniel." Thomas Parker arrived at my house at 10 o'clock at night. I didn't know if I could trust anyone anymore. I stood at the door, staring at him through the peephole before I opened it. The reporters had finally left an hour ago, their vans pulling away into the darkness, but I could still feel their presence like a weight on my chest. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every sound felt like an ambush. Thomas stood on my porch, his hands shoved into the pockets of his coat, his breath misting in the cold October air. He looked older than I remembered, lines etched deep around his eyes. His shoulders hunched slightly forward, as if carrying an invisible burden. I unlocked the door. "Mr. Mitchell," he said quietly. I stepped aside, and he walked in. We sat in the living room, the same room where I'd watched Daniel's press conference just hours earlier. The television was off now, the screen dark and silent, but I could still see his face in my mind, calm, composed, playing the role of the grieving son who'd been forced to expose his corrupt father. Thomas sat across from me, a worn leather briefcase resting on his lap. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable. "I don't know who to trust anymore, Thomas," I said finally, my voice hoarse. "The board's turned on me. The media's turned on me. Even the FBI is starting to question whether I'm telling the truth. And my own son." I stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Thomas nodded slowly. "I know. I saw the press conference." "Then you know what he's accusing me of?" "I do." Thomas leaned forward, his hands folded on top of the briefcase. "And I know it's a lie." I looked up at him, something fragile and desperate stirring in my chest. "How?" "Because I've been watching him, Mr. Mitchell, for a long time." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Thomas exhaled slowly, as if he'd been holding his breath for years. "You asked me to step down as COO 3 years ago. You wanted me to mentor Daniel to help him transition into leadership, and I did. I worked under him. I reported to him. I watched him make decisions, manage accounts, interact with clients." He paused, his jaw tightening. "And I saw things that didn't add up." My pulse quickened. "What kind of things?" Thomas opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. He set it on the coffee table between us, the pages fanning out slightly. "Transaction records," he said. "Ones Daniel tried to delete from the company servers. I managed to recover them before they were permanently erased." I stared at the folder. "What do they show?" "Wire transfers. Millions of dollars moving through shell companies, offshore accounts, dummy corporations. All of it tied back to Daniel." Thomas flipped the folder open, revealing rows of printed bank statements, each one highlighted in yellow. He was careful. He covered his tracks, but he wasn't perfect. I leaned forward, scanning the documents. The numbers were staggering. Transfers of 200,000, 500,000, a million at a time, all routed through names I didn't recognize, companies I'd never heard of. Thomas pulled out another stack of papers. And then there are these. Email printouts. Dozens of them. I saw Daniel's name at the top of each message, along with another name I didn't recognize, Eddie Torres. "Who's Eddie Torres?" I asked. Thomas's expression darkened. "A mechanic. Runs a small auto shop in Queens. Daniel hired him 3 years ago." My blood ran cold. 3 years ago, that's when your wife passed away. Thomas finished quietly. "Yes." I felt the room tilt. "What are you saying?" Thomas pointed to one of the emails dated a week before Catherine's accident. The subject line read, "Final payment, delivery confirmed." "I had a friend in the NYPD run a background check on Torres," Thomas said. "He's got a history. Fraud, forgery, tampering with evidence. He's the kind of guy you hire when you need something done off the books." I couldn't breathe. "Daniel hired him to cut the brake lines on your wife's car." Thomas said, his voice hard. "Yes." I stared at the email, my hands shaking. The words blurred in front of me. Thomas pulled out another set of documents, glossy printouts of credit card statements and receipts. And this is where the money went. I looked down at the receipts. Luxury hotels, 5-star resorts in Las Vegas, Macau, Monaco. Casino charges $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 at a time. Restaurant bills for thousands of dollars. Shopping sprees at designer stores. And then there were the other charges. Discrete payments to escort services. Cash withdrawals in cities across the world. "He wasn't investing the money, Mr. Mitchell," Thomas said quietly. "He was burning through it, gambling, women, living a life most people can only dream of, all funded by the money he stole from your clients." I felt sick. "How much?" "In the last 4 years, close to 10 million on personal expenses alone. The rest went into offshore accounts, probably as a safety net. 10 million. On casinos and hotels and women, while families lost their savings, while retirees watched their nest eggs disappear, while Catherine discovered what he was doing and paid for it with her life." I looked up at Thomas, my voice barely a whisper. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Thomas's expression tightened with something that looked like guilt. "I didn't have enough proof. Daniel was careful. He kept most of his tracks hidden. I only started recovering these documents in the last few months, and even then I wasn't sure what to do with them. Daniel's your son." I didn't want to believe it either. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. But after today, after watching him stand up in front of the world and accuse you of the crimes he committed, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I felt something inside me shift. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. "Will you testify?" I asked. "In court." Thomas didn't hesitate. He stood up and looked me in the eye. "I'm willing to testify against Daniel in court. But first we need to prove those signatures are forged." The following days, Thomas and I worked relentlessly with the FBI to build the case. My lawyer, Jonathan Pierce, set up a war room in his Manhattan office. The walls were covered with timelines, financial charts, and evidence photos. FBI agent Marcus Cole and Detective Sarah Mitchell joined us daily, reviewing every document, every transaction, every lie Daniel had constructed. The first breakthrough came from Dr. Helen Cooper, the forensic document examiner Jonathan hired. She was a small woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and decades of experience. She spent 3 days analyzing the forged signatures on the embezzlement documents. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, looking up from her microscope, "these signatures were created digitally. Someone scanned your real signature, edited it in Photoshop, and printed it onto the documents. Look here, you can see the pixelation under magnification. A real pen signature has pressure variation and ink flow. This has neither." Agent Cole nodded grimly. "That testimony will hold up in court." The second breakthrough came when the FBI located Eddie Torres, the mechanic Daniel had hired. Torres was a 52-year-old man with a criminal record for fraud and unlicensed auto repair. When Agent Cole and 2 other agents showed up at his garage in Newark, Torres broke down within 20 minutes. The confession was recorded on video. Torres admitted that 3 years ago, in August 2020, Daniel had paid him $15,000 in cash to cut the brake lines on a Honda Accord. Torres didn't ask questions. He just did the job and took the money. A week later, he saw the news about Catherine Mitchell's fatal accident on Route 9 and realized what he'd been part of. "I've been living with that guilt ever since," Torres said on the tape, his voice shaking. "I didn't know it was his mother. I swear I didn't know." Agent Cole played the video for me in the war room. I sat frozen, staring at the screen as Torres described in detail how he'd tampered with my wife's car. Jonathan placed a hand on my shoulder. "We have him, Robert. This is enough to reopen Catherine's case." But the most damning evidence came from the financial forensics team. They traced Daniel's offshore accounts and discovered a shell company in the Cayman Islands holding $12 million money siphoned from client trust funds over 4 years. The account was opened under a false name, but the IP address used to access it traced back to Daniel's laptop. Detective Mitchell looked up from her notes. "Mr. Mitchell, we've also confirmed the ownership details of the Mercedes S-Class that was pushed into the river. The car is registered under Daniel's name, but you're listed as the co-owner and co-signer. You guaranteed the loan when Daniel purchased it in 2020. Agent Cole nodded. "Gee, that's actually helpful for us. As co-owner, we were able to access the vehicle's maintenance records, GPS data, and insurance files without needing a separate court order. The GPS log shows the car was driven from Daniel's apartment in Manhattan to your dock that night, and Daniel's phone was in the car the entire time." I closed my eyes. So Daniel had planned it carefully. He'd pushed the car into the river near my dock to make me the first witness, to tie me to the scene, to frame me. "Why did he push it near my house?" I asked quietly. Agent Cole's face was grim. "He wanted you to find it. He wanted you to call 911. He wanted you to be the first person connected to the car. So when the forged documents and the safe were discovered, the police would suspect you. It was part of the frame job, geography, timing, and optics, all designed to make you look guilty." The room went silent. Thomas spoke up. "So this whole thing, from the embezzlement to framing Robert to pushing the car into the river, was part of one long plan?" "Yes," Agent Cole said. "Daniel was setting up his father to take the fall, so he could seize control of Mitchell Financial Group. With Robert in prison, Daniel would inherit the 65% controlling stake and become the sole owner of a company worth hundreds of millions." I felt sick. Agent Cole leaned forward. "Mr. Mitchell, Daniel is smart. He's built a public image as the whistleblower son. The media loves him. If we go to trial, his lawyers will tear you apart on the stand. The best way to win this case is to get him to confess on tape in his own words." I looked up. "How?" "We set a trap. You meet him somewhere private, somewhere he feels safe. We wire the location with hidden cameras and microphones. You get him talking. You get him to admit what he did." "Where?" I asked. Agent Cole pulled out a map. Somewhere with emotional weight. Somewhere he'll let his guard down. I stared at the map for a long moment. Then I remembered the cabin in the woods, the one we used to visit every summer when Daniel was a boy, the place where he'd once said I was his hero. I know where, I said quietly. Agent Cole looked at me. Are you sure you can do this? I met his gaze. I know how. We'll meet him at Lake Placid, the only place where Daniel has any conscience left. Before heading to Lake Placid, I sank into old, happy memories. I sat in my living room, staring at a photograph I'd pulled from the mantel. It was faded now, the colors washed out by time, but I could still see every detail. Catherine, Daniel, and me standing on the dock at Lake Placid. Daniel was 8 years old. Holding up a small trout, he'd caught his face lit up with the kind of pure, unbridled joy that only a child can feel. Catherine had her arm around him, smiling that warm, radiant smile that I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. And I stood beside them, my hand on Daniel's shoulder, looking at my family like they were the only thing in the world that mattered. Because they were. It had been the summer of 1993. We'd spent 2 weeks at the cabin, a small rustic place nestled in the woods near the lake, miles away from the noise and chaos of the city. No phones, no faxes, no business deals, just the three of us. I closed my eyes and the memory washed over me. Daniel had been so small then. His voice still high and clear, his hands still soft. We'd gone fishing every morning, just the two of us sitting on the dock as the sun rose over the water. I taught him how to bait a hook, how to cast the line, how to be patient and wait for the fish to bite. Dad, he'd said one morning, his eyes wide with admiration. You're my hero. I'd laughed and ruffled his hair. I'm just your dad, kiddo. No. He'd insisted, his voice serious. You're my hero. You know everything. I remembered how my chest had swelled with pride, how I'd looked at this little boy, my son, and thought I'll do everything I can to be worthy of that. One evening, we'd sat by the fireplace roasting marshmallows. The rain had been pouring outside, drumming against the roof, and Catherine had wrapped Daniel in a blanket and pulled him close. You know what's important in life, Daniel? She'd asked, her voice soft but firm. What, Mom? Honor, she'd said. Honor is more important than money, more important than success. It's about doing the right thing even when it's hard, even when no one's watching. Daniel had nodded, his young face thoughtful. I'll remember that, Mom. I promise. Catherine had kissed the top of his head. I know you will, sweetheart. Later that night, after Daniel had fallen asleep, I'd sat with Catherine by the fire, her head resting on my shoulder. He's a good kid, I'd said. He is, Catherine had agreed. And he's going to grow up to be a good man. I can feel it. I'd believed her. I'd believed it with every fiber of my being. But now, sitting alone in my living room 30 years later, I had to ask myself, when did it change? When did that innocent, wide-eyed boy who called me his hero turn into the man who'd taken his own mother's life and tried to destroy mine? I opened my eyes, staring at the photograph. Daniel's smile looked so genuine, so pure. Where had that boy gone? The drive to Lake Placid took 5 hours. I left early on Saturday morning before the sun had fully risen. The city was still quiet, the streets empty, and I drove north on the I-87 watching as the skyscrapers and concrete slowly gave way to forests and mountains. By noon, the rain had started. It came down in heavy sheets, pounding against the windshield, turning the road into a slick, treacherous ribbon of asphalt. The wipers worked furiously, but I could barely see more than a few feet ahead. It was the same kind of rain that had fallen the night Catherine passed away. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white, and forced myself to focus on the road. But the memories kept coming. Catherine's laughter, Daniel's voice, the cabin by the lake. When had it all fallen apart? I arrived at Lake Placid at 6 p.m. The cabin looked exactly as I remembered it, small, weathered, surrounded by tall pines. The windows were dark, the porch empty. I parked the car and sat there for a moment staring at the place where we'd been a family. Agent Cole and his team had arrived an hour earlier. They'd set up surveillance equipment inside the cabin, hidden cameras in the living room, audio devices in the walls, everything positioned to capture every word, every movement. Cole had assured me the equipment was invisible. Daniel wouldn't suspect a thing. Cole stepped out of an unmarked van parked 100 yards down the road. He walked over to my car, his expression grim. "You ready, Mr. Mitchell?" he asked. I nodded, though my hands were shaking. "Remember," Cole said, "you have 30 minutes. We need him to confess, on tape. We need him to admit what he did to your wife, what he did to the company, and why he tried to frame you. Can you do that?" I looked at him. "I'll do whatever it takes." Cole studied me for a moment, then nodded. "We'll be listening. If anything goes wrong, we'll move in immediately." I stepped out of the car and walked toward the cabin. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the air was cold and damp, clinging to my skin like a second layer. My footsteps echoed on the wooden porch. I knocked on the door. For a moment there was nothing, just the sound of the rain and the distant rustle of wind through the trees. And then the door opened. Daniel stood there. He looked terrible. His face was pale and gaunt, his cheeks hollow, his eyes red and bloodshot. He'd lost weight. His clothes hung loosely on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stared at each other, father and son, standing on opposite sides of a chasm that felt impossible to cross. And then Daniel's voice, rough and tired, broke the silence. "You found this place?" I stepped into the cabin. The door closed behind me. It was just the two of us now. The interior looked exactly as I remembered it. Worn wooden floors, a stone fireplace in the center of the room, a small kitchen tucked into the corner. But the warmth that had once filled this place was gone. The air was cold and stale, and the shadows seemed to press in from every corner. Daniel stood by the window, his back to me, staring out at the rain. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating, filled with everything we hadn't said over the past 3 years. Everything we couldn't say. Finally, Daniel turned to face me. His eyes were hollow, his expression guarded. "I didn't think you'd come," he said quietly. "I had to," I replied. He gestured to the couch. "Sit." I walked over slowly, my legs feeling heavier with each step, and sat down. Daniel took the chair across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. We were only a few feet apart, but it felt like miles. I looked at him, really looked at him, and tried to find some trace of the boy I'd raised. The boy who'd called me his hero, the boy who'd promised to make us proud. But all I saw was a stranger. I let out a long, tired breath and leaned back against the couch. When I spoke, my voice was quiet, defeated. "I'm done, Daniel." He frowned. "What?" "I'm done fighting," I said. "The board's already suspended me. The media thinks I'm a criminal. My own lawyer says the case against me is almost impossible to win. Even if I prove the signatures are forged, even if I prove I didn't embezzle that money, the damage is done. My reputation is destroyed. The company I spent 35 years building is gone." I rubbed my face with both hands, letting the exhaustion show. "I can't do this anymore." Daniel was watching me carefully now, his eyes sharp, calculating. "What are you saying?" he asked. I looked at him, my expression empty. I'm saying you win. I'll transfer my shares to you, all 65%. You can have the company. You can have everything. I just want this to be over. For a moment, Daniel didn't react. He just stared at me as if trying to determine whether I was telling the truth. And then slowly, his expression changed. The tension in his shoulders eased. The corners of his mouth lifted into the faintest hint of a smile. He'd bought it. "You're serious," he said. "I'm serious." I nodded. "I'll sign the papers tomorrow. You'll have full control. I'll disappear. I'll leave New York, change my name if I have to. You'll never hear from me again." Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The triumph in his eyes was unmistakable. He looked like a man who'd just won a war he'd been fighting for years. "I'm glad you're finally seeing reason, Dad," he said. I forced myself to nod. "I just want to understand, Daniel, before I walk away. Before I give you everything." His smile faltered slightly. "Understand what? Why?" I looked at him, my voice soft. "Why did you do all of this? The embezzlement, the forgery, the lies. Was it really just about the money?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me." He stood up abruptly, pacing toward the fireplace. He stared into the empty hearth, his back to me again. "Do you have any idea what it's like?" He said, his voice hard. "Being your son. Living in your shadow. Everyone always comparing me to you. Robert Mitchell built an empire from nothing. Robert Mitchell is a genius. Robert Mitchell never makes mistakes." He turned to face me, his eyes blazing. "I was 28 years old when you made me CEO, 28, and everyone expected me to be you, to run the company the way you did, to make the same decisions, to be perfect." "I never asked you to be perfect," I said quietly. "You didn't have to." Daniel's voice rose. It was in every look, every conversation, every time you introduced me to a client or a board member. "This is my son. He's going to take over someday. Do you know how much pressure that is? Do you know what it feels like to know that no matter what you do, you'll never be good enough?" I didn't answer. I just watched him, letting him talk. "So yes." Daniel continued, his voice bitter. "I took the money. I spent it. I gambled it away in Macau and Monaco. I stayed in 5-star hotels and dated women who didn't care who my father was. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't living in your shadow. I felt free. And when the money ran out, I asked." Daniel laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "I took more and more. And when I realized I couldn't cover my tracks anymore, I decided to make it your problem instead of mine." He sat down again, leaning forward. "You built this company, Dad. You made it what it is, but it was killing me. So I decided to take it from you. All of it. And you know what? It felt good." I looked at him, my chest tight. "And your mother?" Daniel's expression flickered just for a moment. Something like guilt or regret flashed across his face. But then it was gone, replaced by cold defiance. "She was going to ruin everything," he said flatly. "She was going to tell you. She was going to go to the police. I couldn't let that happen. So you cut the brake lines on her car." Daniel didn't answer. He just stared at me, his jaw set. I felt something crack inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my voice steady. "I understand," I said quietly. "I do. You felt trapped. You felt like you had no choice. Daniel blinked, surprised. I paused, looking deep into my son's eyes. I have one last question. Then I'll give you everything. Just answer me honestly, Daniel. If you're still with me at this point, please drop the word justice in the comments, so I know you're here. Before we continue to the climax, I want to remind you this story contains dramatized elements created for storytelling purposes. If this isn't for you, feel free to step away now. Also, wherever you're from, please take care and stay warm. Thank you for being part of this journey. I took a deep breath. Daniel, did you take your mother's life? The words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. For a long moment, Daniel didn't move. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark and distant. And then slowly, he smiled. It wasn't the warm smile I remembered from his childhood. It wasn't the nervous smile he used to give me when he was unsure of himself. It was cold, empty. The smile of a man who had nothing left to lose. Yes, he said simply. The single word hit me like a physical blow. My chest tightened, and I felt the air leave my lungs. I'd known somewhere deep down I'd known, but hearing him say it out loud was different. It made it real. Why? My voice came out as a whisper. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, his expression almost bored. Because Mom was too righteous. She was too good. She found out about the $5 million I'd taken, and instead of coming to me, instead of trying to help me, she went straight to some private investigator. She gathered evidence. She was planning to go to the police the very next morning. He shook his head, as if the memory annoyed him. She was going to ruin everything, he continued. She was going to destroy my career, my reputation, my future. And for what $5 million, that's nothing compared to what I could have built. What I did build. I stared at him, my hands trembling. So you stopped her? I had to. Daniel's voice was calm, matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing a business decision. I hired Eddie Torres, $15,000 cash. He cut the brake lines on her car, not enough to fail immediately, but enough that they'd give out under heavy braking. I waited for a rainy night. I knew Mom always drove too fast when it rained. She was confident, fearless. He paused, his eyes distant. She crashed into a utility pole on Route 9. The airbag deployed, but the impact was too severe. She was gone by the time the paramedics arrived. He said it so casually, so coldly, as if he were describing the weather. And you let me believe it was an accident, I said, my voice breaking. For 3 years, you let me blame the rain, the road, myself, for not being there. It was an accident. Daniel interrupted, his tone sharp. Legally, at least. No one suspected anything. The police ruled it a tragic accident caused by wet roads and speed. Eddie disposed of the tools. I paid him off. The evidence disappeared. And you? He looked at me, his eyes hard. You mourned her. You buried her. You moved on. Just like I needed you to. I felt bile rise in my throat. And then you kept going. You didn't just stop at $5 million. You stole $47 million. You forged my signature. You tried to frame me for everything you'd done. Daniel's smile widened. Of course I did. Why stop with Mom gone? There was no one left to catch me. You were too busy grieving, too distracted to notice what I was doing. I had free rein over the company, so I took advantage of it. He stood up, pacing toward the window. I funneled money through shell companies. I set up offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I falsified documents and made sure your signature was on every single one. I spent years building the perfect frame. And when I was ready, I sank my car in the river right next to your dock, knowing you'd find it. Knowing you'd call the police. Knowing you'd look guilty from the very beginning. He turned to face me, his expression triumphant. It was brilliant, really. If everything had gone according to plan, you'd be in prison right now. And I'd have full control of Mitchell Financial Group. All 65% of your shares, all the power, all the money. I felt something inside me shatter. And the family? I asked quietly. What about us? What about the years we spent together, the summers at this cabin, the nights by the fire, the promises you made to your mother and me? Daniel's expression didn't change. And I don't need family, Dad. I never did. Family is just a liability, an obligation. I needed money. I needed power. And I was willing to do whatever it took to get them. He looked at me, his eyes cold and empty. You and Mom, you were in my way. So I removed you. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking beneath me. Tears were streaming down my face, now hot and unbidden. I didn't try to stop them. You know what the most painful thing is, Daniel? I said, my voice breaking. It's not that you betrayed me. It's not that you stole from me or tried to destroy me, or even that you took your mother's life. I looked at him, my vision blurred by tears. The most painful thing is that I failed. I failed to teach you how to be a good person. I failed to show you that honor and integrity matter more than money. I failed as a father. Daniel stared at me, his expression flickering just for a moment. Something like doubt or guilt crossed his face. But then it was gone, replaced by that same cold defiance. You didn't fail, Dad, he said quietly. I just chose a different path. I shook my head, wiping my eyes. No, Daniel, you chose the wrong path, and now you're going to pay for it. Daniel frowned. What are you talking about? I didn't answer. And then, as if on cue, the cabin door burst open. Agents flooded into the room, Agent Cole, Detective Mitchell, and half a dozen FBI officers in tactical gear. They moved with precision, their weapons drawn, their voices sharp and commanding. Daniel Mitchell, you are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and the orchestration of your mother's passing. You have the right to remain silent. Daniel's face went white. His eyes snapped to me wide with shock and disbelief. What? His voice cracked. What did you do? I looked at him, my expression calm now. Steady. I got your confession, I said quietly. Every word, on tape. Everything you just admitted, the embezzlement, the forgery, Eddie Torres, the break lines, your plan to frame me. The FBI heard it all. Daniel staggered backward, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, but there was none. The cabin door burst open. The FBI rushed in. Daniel was in shock when he realized I had set a trap to get his confession. Daniel was taken away. I stood alone in the old cabin, my body trembling uncontrollably. I watched through the window as the FBI agents led him out into the rain, his hands cuffed behind his back, his head bowed. He didn't resist. He didn't say a word. He just walked like a man who'd already accepted his fate. Agent Cole had stayed behind, standing by the door, giving me space. Detective Mitchell was outside coordinating with the team, but I barely heard them. All I could hear was the echo of Daniel's voice, cold and emotionless, admitting what he'd done. I don't need family. I never did. The words replayed in my mind over and over like a broken record. My legs gave out. I collapsed onto the couch, my hands covering my face, and I sobbed. I sobbed for Catherine, for the woman I'd loved, the woman who'd been taken from me by our own son. I sobbed for the boy Daniel used to be, the innocent child who'd called me his hero and promised to make us proud. And I sobbed for the man he'd become, the cold, calculating stranger who'd destroyed everything we'd built. Where had I gone wrong? Where had we gone wrong? I didn't know. And maybe I never would. The days that followed were a blur. The media, which had vilified me just a week earlier, reversed course almost overnight. Headlines that had once read, "Robert Mitchell, financial criminal," now screamed, "Daniel Mitchell, the most cursed son in America." Op-eds dissected his crimes, his motives, his callousness. Talk shows debated whether he was a sociopath, a narcissist, or simply a man consumed by greed. He was no longer the brave son exposing his corrupt father. He was a monster. The board of directors held an emergency meeting. They sent me a formal letter of apology written on company letterhead and signed by every member. They admitted they'd been wrong to suspend me. They admitted they'd acted too hastily, too rashly, without waiting for all the facts. And they begged me to return as chairman and CEO. But I refused. I couldn't go back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The company I'd spent 35 years building felt tainted, now stained by what Daniel had done. Every office, every conference room, every contract bore the shadow of his betrayal. Instead, I asked Thomas Parker to step in as interim CEO. He was reluctant. At first, he didn't want the responsibility, didn't want the spotlight, but I convinced him. I told him the company needed someone honest, someone trustworthy, someone who understood what it meant to do the right thing. He agreed. A week after Daniel's arrest, I started meeting with the victims. There were over 200 of them. Families who'd lost their savings. Retirees whose nest eggs had been wiped out. Small business owners who'd trusted Mitchell Financial Group with their livelihoods, only to watch it disappear. I met them one by one in small conference rooms and quiet cafes, and I listened to their stories. One woman, Margaret Wilson, 70 years old, sat across from me with trembling hands and red-rimmed eyes. She'd lost $340,000. Her husband, George, had been battling cancer for the past 2 years, and the treatments were expensive. They'd trusted Daniel to manage their retirement fund to keep it safe. We thought we were doing the right thing," Margaret said, her voice breaking. We thought your company was trustworthy." I couldn't look her in the eye. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Wilson. I can't put into words how sorry I am." She nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "I know it wasn't your fault, Mr. Mitchell. I know that now. But my husband, he's not getting better. And without that money, I don't know how we're going to—" Her voice cracked, and she couldn't finish the sentence. I reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm going to make this right," I said. "I promise you. I'm going to do everything I can to compensate every single person Daniel hurt." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and doubt. "Can you really do that?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I'm going to try." That night I sat in my study, staring at the financial records Thomas had compiled. The total amount Daniel had embezzled was staggering $47 million stolen from over 200 clients. The company's insurance would cover some of it, but not all. Not enough. I did the math. If I sold my personal assets, my house, my investments, my shares in the company, I could raise close to $110 million. It would be enough to compensate every victim in full, with money left over to set up a fund for future restitution claims. It would leave me with almost nothing. But it was the right thing to do. I picked up my phone and called Jonathan Pierce, my lawyer. "Jonathan," I said, "I want to sell everything. My house, my portfolio, 40% of my shares in Mitchell Financial Group. I want to use the proceeds to compensate Daniel's victims. All of them. Every last dollar." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Robert," Jonathan said carefully, "are you sure that's everything you've worked for? Your entire life?" "I'm sure," I said. "It's what Catherine would have wanted." Jonathan sighed. All right, I'll draw up the paperwork. After I hung up, I walked over to the mantel and picked up the old photograph I'd been staring at for days. The one from Lake Placid, 1994. Catherine, Daniel, and me standing on the dock, smiling like we didn't have a care in the world. I traced my finger over Catherine's face, then Daniel's. The boy in the photo looked so innocent, so full of hope. What had happened to him? When had he stopped being that boy? I closed my eyes and the tears came again. "Where did we go wrong, Catherine?" I whispered. "Where did we go wrong?" But there was no answer. Just the silence of the empty room and the weight of a question I'd be asking myself for the rest of my life. I decided to sell my personal assets to compensate the victims. Looking at an old family photo, I asked, "Where did we go wrong, Catherine?" The next 6 months were the longest and heaviest of my life. Every week, I sat in Jonathan Pierce's office, a sleek high-rise in downtown Manhattan, going over evidence with him and Agent Cole. We reviewed documents, bank statements, forensic reports. We prepared testimony. We rehearsed questions and answers. We built the case piece by piece, brick by brick. Jonathan was relentless. He was in his late 50s, a man with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He'd spent 30 years prosecuting white-collar criminals, and he knew how to dismantle a defense, but even he admitted this case was unusual. "Your son is going to have the best lawyers money can buy," Jonathan said one afternoon, tapping his pen against a stack of documents. "They're going to argue diminished capacity coercion, even temporary insanity. They're going to try to paint him as a victim of pressure and circumstance." "Can they win?" I asked. Jonathan shook his head. "Not with the confession we have on tape. Not with Eddie Torres willing to testify. Not with Dr. Cooper's forensic analysis of the forged signatures. But they'll try. And juries can be unpredictable. Eddie Torres had agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. He'd been arrested the same night as Daniel, charged as an accessory to causing Catherine's passing. His lawyer had cut a deal with the prosecutors. Eddie would give a full account of what Daniel had paid him to do, and in return, he'd serve 5 years instead of 25. I didn't like it. I didn't like the idea of the man who'd cut the brake lines on my wife's car walking free in 5 years. But Agent Cole assured me it was necessary. Without Eddie's testimony, the case against Daniel would be harder to prove, and I wanted Daniel convicted. I wanted the world to know what he'd done. So I accepted it. The nights were the hardest. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel. Not the cold, calculating man who'd confessed to taking his mother's life, but the boy he used to be. The 8-year-old who'd called me his hero. The teenager who'd sat by the fire at Lake Placid and promised to make us proud. And I couldn't stop asking myself, where had it started? When had the boy I loved turned into the man I barely recognized? One night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, a memory came back to me, sharp and vivid like it had happened yesterday. Daniel had been 16 years old. It was the summer of 2001, and he'd just gotten his driver's license. Catherine and I had given him a car, a used Honda Civic, nothing fancy, but it was his. He'd been so excited. One afternoon, I'd noticed that $500 was missing from my wallet. I'd confronted Daniel about it. He'd looked me straight in the eye and said he didn't know anything about it. But I'd seen the lie in his eyes. I'd seen the way his hands fidgeted, the way his voice wavered just slightly. Catherine had wanted to punish him. She'd wanted to take the car away, ground him for the summer. But I'd stopped her. "He's a good kid," I'd said. "He made a mistake. Let's just talk to him." So we'd sat him down, and I'd given him a gentle lecture about honesty and responsibility. I'd told him that trust was important, that lying would only make things worse. And Daniel had nodded and apologized, and promised it wouldn't happen again. And I'd believed him. Looking back now, I realized that was the moment. That was when I should have been stricter. That was when I should have held him accountable, made him face real consequences. But I hadn't. I'd let it slide. I'd convinced myself it was just a phase, just a teenage mistake. And maybe if I'd been harder on him, then things would have turned out differently. Or maybe it wouldn't have mattered at all. I didn't know. And I'd never know. In February, Daniel's lawyer, Richard Lawson, a high-powered defense attorney with a reputation for getting guilty, clients acquitted, reached out to Jonathan Pierce with a plea deal. Daniel would plead guilty to embezzlement and fraud. In exchange, the prosecutors would drop the charges related to Catherine's passing. He'd serve 15 years instead of life. Jonathan called me as soon as he got the offer. "What do you think?" he asked. I didn't hesitate. "No." "Robert, this is a strong offer. 15 years is no," I said again, my voice firm. "The truth needs to come out. All of it. What Daniel did to Catherine, what he did to the company, what he tried to do to me. I want it all exposed in open court. I want the world to see who he really is." Jonathan was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed. "All right. I'll tell Lawson we're rejecting the deal." "Thank you." "Robert." Jonathan said, his voice softer now. "You know this means the trial will be public. Every detail will be dissected by the media. It's going to be brutal." "I know," I said, "but it's the right thing to do." And it was. Catherine deserved justice. The victims deserved justice. And Daniel needed to face the full weight of what he'd done. The trial was scheduled to begin on April 15th, 2024. The day before, I was sitting in my study going over my testimony one last time when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a courier holding a small envelope. "Delivery for Robert Mitchell," the man said. I signed for it and closed the door. The envelope was plain white with my name written in neat handwriting I recognized immediately. Daniel's handwriting. I stared at it for a long moment, my heart pounding. Then I walked back into my study and sat down at my desk, the envelope resting in front of me. It was a letter. From Daniel. Sent from the detention center where he was being held awaiting trial. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. Part of me wanted to tear it open immediately, to read whatever he'd written. But another part of me, maybe the larger part, didn't want to know. Didn't want to hear his excuses, his justifications, his lies. The day before the trial, I received a letter from Daniel sent from prison. I held it in my hands, unopened. On the morning of the trial, I woke up at 5 a.m. with a heavy heart. I hadn't slept well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Catherine's face, heard Daniel's cold voice in the cabin, felt the weight of everything that had been lost. I dressed in a dark suit and tie. Jonathan Pierce picked me up at 7. We drove to the Manhattan Criminal Courthouse in silence. The streets were already packed with media vans, protesters, and curious onlookers. Security had to escort us through the crowd. Inside the courtroom was standing room only. Victims filled the benches. Journalists lined the walls. At the front, Judge Patricia Harmon, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, presided over the proceedings. Then the bailiffs brought Daniel in. He wore an orange prison jumpsuit. His hands were cuffed in front of him. He had lost weight, maybe 20 or 30 pounds, and his face was gaunt, hollow-aged. He looked like a stranger. Our eyes met for a brief moment. Then he looked away. Judge Harmon struck her gavel. The people of the state of New York versus Daniel Robert Mitchell. This court is now in session. The prosecutor, Lisa Hammond, stood. She was a woman in her early 40s with short brown hair and a reputation for winning white-collar crime cases. She had spent months preparing this case with the FBI. Your Honor, the people will prove that the defendant, Daniel Mitchell, engaged in a deliberate multi-year conspiracy to embezzle $47 million from client trust funds, bribe government officials with $2.3 million, commit $8 million in tax fraud, and most heinously, arrange the death of his own mother, Catherine Mitchell, to cover up his crimes. The defendant then attempted to frame his own father, Robert Mitchell, by forging documents and planting evidence. The people have 73 counts against the defendant, including first-degree murder, embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Harmon struck her gavel. Lisa Hammond continued, "We will present forensic evidence, financial records, witness testimony, and a recorded confession in which the defendant admits in his own words to all of these crimes." She turned and looked directly at Daniel. "The evidence will show that Daniel Mitchell is not a whistleblower. He is a calculating criminal who destroyed lives, betrayed his family, and pursued wealth and power at any cost." She sat down. Daniel's defense attorney, Richard Lawson, stood. He was tall, silver-haired, expensive-looking. He approached the jury with a calm, confident smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client is not a monster. He is a man who made mistakes under extreme pressure. Yes, Daniel Mitchell took money. Yes, he made poor choices. But the prosecution's claim that he deliberately caused his mother's death is based on circumstantial evidence, coerced testimony, and a father's vengeful desire to destroy his own son. We will show that Daniel acted out of fear, desperation, and panic, not malice. And we will prove that the so-called confession was obtained through manipulation and entrapment." He sat down. Judge Harmon nodded. "The prosecution may call its first witness." Lisa Hammond stood. "The people call Edward Torres." Eddie Torres, the mechanic, was brought in. He looked nervous, his hands shaking as he was sworn in. He testified that Daniel had paid him $15,000 in cash to cut the brake lines on a Honda Accord in August 2020. He described the meeting, the payment, the work he did. He admitted he didn't ask questions, he just took the money. "Did you know whose car it was?" Lisa asked. "No, ma'am. Not until I saw the news about Mrs. Mitchell's accident. That's when I realized what I'd done." "And why are you testifying today?" Torres looked down. "Because I can't live with it anymore. What I did was wrong. I want to make it right." Next, Lisa called Dr. Helen Cooper, the forensic document examiner. "Doctor," Cooper explained how the signatures on the embezzlement documents were digitally forged using scanned images and photo editing software. She showed side-by-side comparisons pointing out pixelation, lack of pressure variation, and other telltale signs. "In my professional opinion, Doctor," Cooper concluded, "these signatures were not made by Robert Mitchell. They were fabricated." Then Agent Marcus Cole took the stand. He described the FBI's investigation, the discovery of the $12 million in the Cayman Islands, the forged documents, and the GPS data from the Mercedes. "Agent Cole," Lisa Hammond asked, "can you explain the ownership of the vehicle that was pushed into the Hudson River?" "Yes. The 2020 Mercedes S-Class license plate, 7XPJ492, is registered under Daniel Mitchell's name. However, Robert Mitchell is listed as the co-owner and co-signer because he guaranteed the loan when Daniel purchased the vehicle. This co-ownership allowed us to access vehicle records, GPS logs, and insurance files, which proved critical to the investigation." "And what did the GPS data show?" "The car was driven from Daniel's Manhattan apartment to Robert Mitchell's private dock on the night of October 2023. Daniel's cell phone was in the car the entire time." Finally, Agent Cole played the audio recording from the Lake Placid cabin. The courtroom fell silent as Daniel's voice filled the room. "I don't need family. I only need money and power." Several jurors gasped. Some victims in the gallery began to cry. When the recording ended, Lisa Hammond turned to the judge. "The people call Thomas Parker." Thomas stepped up to the stand. I saw his shoulders tremble slightly from the pressure. He was dressed in a simple gray suit, his tie knotted neatly, his expression somber. Lisa Hammond approached him with quiet confidence. "Mr. Parker, can you state your name and occupation for the record?" "Thomas Parker. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Mitchell Financial Group. I've held that position for 15 years. And what was your relationship with the defendant?" "Daniel was my boss for 3 years. Before that, I reported to his father, Robert Mitchell. I thought I could mentor Daniel, help him lead with integrity." Lisa nodded. "During your time working under Daniel, did you observe anything unusual?" Thomas took a breath. "Yes. About 2 years ago, I noticed irregularities, large sums moving through shell companies' transactions that didn't match our official records. When I asked Daniel, he said it was confidential work, but the more I dug, the more wrong it felt." Lisa handed him a stack of documents. "What did you discover?" Thomas flipped through the pages, his jaw tight. Daniel was living far beyond his salary. "I found credit card statements showing massive gambling losses. In one night alone, he lost $3 million at a casino in Macau." The courtroom murmured. Judge Harmon struck her gavel. "Order." $3 million in one night," Lisa pressed. "Yes, over 4 years, Daniel spent close to $10 million on gambling Las Vegas, Monaco, Macau. He was known by name at exclusive casinos worldwide. And the source of this money, client trust funds. He was stealing it to fund his lifestyle." Lisa pulled out another document. "What else did you find?" Thomas's voice hardened. "He was spending $20,000 a month on an escort in New York. He paid for her apartment, her car, her shopping, all with stolen money." I felt sick. The courtroom was silent. Lisa held up a printout. "Can you identify this email?" Thomas glanced at it. "It's from Daniel to Eddie Torres, dated 1 week before Catherine Mitchell's passing. Read the subject line. Final payment. Delivery confirmed." Lisa retrieved another page. "And the body." Thomas read aloud. "Eddie, the problem will be handled as discussed. 15,000 cash as agreed. Make sure there's nothing that can be traced back. I need this done clean." The courtroom exploded. Judge Harmon banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order." Lisa waited for silence. Haas. What was Daniel referring to when he said, "the problem"? Thomas looked directly at Daniel. His mother, Catherine Mitchell. She discovered the embezzlement and was planning to go to the police. He needed to stop her. Daniel's face went white. His hands clenched into fists. I saw pure hatred flash across his face as he stared at Thomas. "Did you witness any interactions between Daniel and his mother that support this?" "Yes." 2 weeks before Catherine passed, I heard them arguing in Daniel's office. Catherine said she had proof he was stealing and was going to the police. Daniel told her she was making a mistake. He said if she went through with it, she'd regret it. "Did you report this?" Thomas's voice dropped. "No. I didn't think he'd actually... I'll regret that for the rest of my life." Lisa's tone sharpened. "Did Daniel attempt to influence your testimony?" "Yes. 3 months ago, his lawyer offered me $500,000 to refuse to testify. They wanted me to claim I didn't remember key details." "And what did you do?" Thomas met my eyes, then Daniel's. "I refused. I told them I wasn't going to lie. Catherine Mitchell deserved better." Lisa returned to her seat. "No further questions." Richard Lawson's cross-examination was weak. Thomas didn't waver. Judge Harmon looked at Lisa. "Do you have further witnesses?" "Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Robert Mitchell." I stood up, my heart pounding. I stepped up to the stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The courtroom fell silent. Every eye was on me. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. But I forced myself to stand straight to look directly at my son. Daniel sat at the defense table in his orange jumpsuit. His hands folded, his face blank. He didn't look away. Neither did I. Lisa Hammond, the prosecutor, stood and approached the witness stand. Her voice was steady, professional. "Mr. Mitchell, thank you for being here today. I know this is not easy for you." I nodded. "Before we begin, I need to ask you one question. Do you love your son?" I swallowed hard. "Yes," I said. "I love my son." Lisa paused, letting the words settle. "Then why are you here today testifying against him?" I looked at Daniel, then back at Lisa. "Because I love my son," I said slowly. "But justice is more important than covering up for him," the courtroom murmured. Judge Patricia Harmon tapped her gavel lightly. Lisa nodded. "Mr. Mitchell, can you tell the court what you witnessed on the night of October 2023 at the Hudson River dock?" I took a deep breath. "I was at my private dock half a mile south of Riverside Marina. It was around 9 o'clock at night. I heard an engine growing louder. I looked up and saw a black Mercedes S-Class license plate 7XPJ492 racing down the riverbank road. The headlights were off. The car crashed through the guardrail and plunged into the river. My voice shook slightly. I recognized the license plate. It was my son's car. "What did you do?" Lisa asked. I grabbed my fishing boat and rowed out. I called 911 and reported the car. When I reached it, the doors were open, the engine was still running. But there was no one inside. And then I looked toward the shore. I saw Daniel standing there watching. Our eyes met. Then he turned and ran into the trees. He got into another dark sedan and drove away. Daniel's jaw tightened. His lawyer, Richard Lawson, scribbled notes. Lisa nodded. "Mr. Mitchell, can you tell the court what you found in the safe that was recovered from the trunk of that car?" I nodded slowly. 3 USB drives, a notebook full of financial records, $50,000 in cash, and an envelope labeled Catherine Proof. My voice cracked. Inside that envelope was an audio recording. My wife Catherine had secretly recorded a conversation with Daniel 1 week before she passed away. In that recording, she confronted him about embezzling $5 million from our company. She told him she was going to the police. I paused, my throat tight. Daniel's reply was cold. He said, "Mother shouldn't do that." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Harmon struck her gavel again. "There were also photographs," I continued. "Photos of my wife's car. The brake lines had been cut. Deliberately." Lisa Hammond let the silence hang for a moment. "Mr. Mitchell, what happened when you confronted your son at Lake Placid?" I closed my eyes, remembering the cabin, the rain, the cold. The FBI had set up hidden cameras and microphones in the cabin. I told Daniel I was ready to give up. I offered him everything, my shares, my reputation, my life. I just wanted to know why. I opened my eyes and looked directly at my son. He confessed. He said he hired a mechanic named Eddie Torres and paid him $15,000 to cut the brake lines on my wife's car. He said his mother was too righteous and had to be removed. He said he framed me by forging my signature on documents to make it look like I was the one embezzling. He said he didn't need family. He only needed money and power. My voice broke completely. Tears streamed down my face. He said those words to my face in that cabin where we used to fish together when he was 8 years old. And he didn't even blink. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. That was the moment I realized I had lost my son. Lisa Hammond gave me a moment to collect myself. Then she nodded and returned to her table. "To your witness, Mr. Lawson." Richard Lawson stood. He was tall, silver-haired, with sharp eyes and a measured tone. He approached the stand slowly. "Mr. Mitchell, you've painted a very dramatic picture for the jury today. But let me ask you this, isn't it true that you're testifying here today, not because you care about justice, but because you want revenge?" I looked at him confused. "Revenge." "Yes, Mr. Mitchell, revenge. Your son publicly accused you of embezzling tens of millions of dollars. Your reputation was destroyed. Your company's stock plummeted 40%. The board of directors suspended your authority. Isn't it true that you're here today to get back at him for humiliating you in front of the entire world?" The courtroom went silent. I looked at Lawson, then at Daniel. "No," I said firmly. "That's not true." "Really?" Lawson pressed. "You expect this jury to believe that a father whose own son accused him of financial crimes on national television would then turn around and help the FBI trap that son, record his confession, and bring him to trial out of pure love for justice?" I met his gaze without flinching. "My son tried to frame me for crimes I didn't commit. Yes. My reputation was destroyed. Yes. But I didn't come here for revenge. I came here because my wife Catherine deserves justice. The 200 victims who lost their life savings deserve justice. And yes, even my son deserves justice because he needs to be held accountable for what he did." Lawson's eyes narrowed. "So you're saying you don't hate your son?" "No." I said quietly, "I don't hate him. I grieve for him." Lawson stared at me for a long moment, then turned away. "No further questions." Judge Harmon nodded. "You may step down, Mr. Mitchell." I stood slowly, my legs trembling. I walked down from the witness stand, past the jury box, past the prosecutor's table. As I walked past the defense table, Daniel looked up at me. His eyes were red, his face hollow. He leaned forward slightly and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "I hate you, Dad." I stopped. For a moment I couldn't move. Then I turned and looked down at him. "I know," I said softly, "but I still love you." Daniel's face twisted. He looked away. I turned and walked back to my seat beside Jonathan Pierce, my heart breaking all over again. The jury deliberated for 2 hours, 2 hours that felt like a century. I sat in the courtroom beside Jonathan Pierce, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my heart pounding. Around me, victims, journalists, and onlookers waited in silence. Finally, the jury filed back in. Judge Patricia Harmon asked them to stand. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The forewoman stood, a middle-aged woman with gray hair and steady eyes. "We have your honor. On the charge of conspiracy to cause the death of Catherine Mitchell, how do you find the defendant? Guilty. On the charge of embezzlement of $47 million, how do you find the defendant? Guilty." One by one, all 73 counts were read. Every single one came back the same. Guilty. The courtroom erupted. Judge Harmon struck her gavel hard. "Order." She turned to Daniel. "Daniel Mitchell, you have been found guilty on all counts. You are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Daniel sat motionless, his face blank. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He sat like a stone statue as the bailiffs placed handcuffs on his wrists and led him away. As he passed me, our eyes met one last time. Then he was gone. Outside the courthouse, victims surrounded me. Margaret Wilson, the 70-year-old woman who had lost $340,000 while her husband fought cancer, hugged me tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for telling the truth." I nodded, unable to speak. I felt peace, but also utter exhaustion. 6 months later, in October 2024, I sold my remaining shares in Mitchell Financial Group. The sale brought in $110 million. I used that money to establish the Catherine Mitchell Foundation, dedicated to helping victims of financial fraud. Every victim received 100% compensation. Margaret Wilson received her $340,000. Every family was made whole. Thomas Parker took over as CEO. The company rebuilt its reputation slowly but surely. Over the following months, letters began arriving from Daniel. Short at first, awkward apologies, fragmented thoughts. Then longer, more honest, more raw. By January 2026, I had received 27 letters. Each one showed a man grappling with what he'd done. The 27th letter arrived on a cold winter morning. I sat in my study, snow falling softly outside, and read it. Dad, I've been thinking about the cabin at Lake Placid, the summer when I was 8 and told you that you were my hero. I remember Mom teaching me that honor matters more than money. I remember the fireplace, the rain, the promises I made. I broke all of them. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I understand now. What I did to Mom, to you, to all those families, it destroyed lives. It destroyed me. Thank you for choosing justice. It was the only thing that could save me. Daniel, I set the letter down and picked up a pen. For a long time, I stared at the blank page. Then I began to write. Daniel, I'm not saying I forgive you yet, but I see you're trying to atone. That's a start. Your mother believed that honor was more important than money. She believed redemption was possible even after terrible mistakes. I'm trying to believe that too. Dad, I sealed the letter and set it on my desk. Then I stood and walked to the window. Snow blanketed the garden Catherine had loved, covering the roses she'd planted years ago. The world was quiet, peaceful. Greed and decadent living led only to destruction. True love sometimes means letting someone face consequences so they can have a chance to atone. I thought of Catherine. I thought of Daniel. I thought of all the lives broken and slowly being rebuilt. And I whispered to the falling snow, sometimes hope is all we need. Looking back, I see where I went wrong. I built an empire, but failed to build a son with integrity. I taught Daniel how to make money, but never taught him why honor matters more. Don't be like me. Don't sacrifice your children's character for success. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any business failure. When my son chose greed over love, it shattered me completely. But this isn't just about family betrayal. It's about unchecked ambition and decadent living. Daniel didn't suddenly decide to harm his mother. He made 1,000 small choices, each pulling him further from the values Catherine and I tried to instill. These lessons remind me of Grandpa's stories, the kind passed down through generations. My grandfather used to say, "A man who loses his soul to money has lost everything." I wish I'd listened. I wish I'd told Daniel those grandpa stories more often instead of pushing him to chase profits. The Bible says, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul?" Daniel gained wealth, power, status, and lost himself completely. But even in prison, I believe God still offers him redemption. My advice: teach your children that family betrayal begins when we place money above people. Love them enough to hold them accountable. Share those grandpa stories. Wisdom, not wealth, is the true inheritance. Thank you for journeying with me to the end. What would you do in my position? Choose justice or protect your child? Comment below. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more. Note: while inspired by real themes, some elements were dramatized for storytelling. If this isn't your style, explore other videos on the channel.